The Tennessee courthouse wasn't usually this full. Most mornings, the benches were half empty, occupied only by the occasional reporter scribbling notes and a handful of attorneys discussing motions under their breath. But today felt different, charged, almost electric, like the air itself understood that something heavy, unspoken, was about to unfold. Sunlight spilled in through the tall windows, catching on the polished wood of the witness stand and reflecting off the gold nameplate in front of the judge. Hun. Miriam O'Connell. She was known for her patience, her sharp instincts, and her ability to read people before they even spoke, but even she wasn't prepared for what was about to happen. Near the prosecutor's table, a uniformed officer walked in with a dog at his side. Not just any dog, K9 Ranger, a veteran German shepherd with 7 years of service, over a dozen commendations, and a reputation for never making mistakes. He was calm, disciplined, almost regal in how he moved. People often whispered that he could smell guilt, that he could sense fear. Some said he understood more than any human realized. His handler, Deputy Sam Keller, was just as steady. Tall, composed, and trained to read his canine partner's every nuance, he held Ranger's leash loosely as they entered the courtroom aisle. They were here for protocol. Ranger had been present at the scene central to today's hearing, so his presence was noted for legal accuracy. Nothing more. At least that's what everyone believed. The courtroom had just settled when it happened. Ranger, halfway down the aisle, froze. Completely. His paw hovered mid-step. His ears flicked upward, then angled sharply forward. His body went rigid, muscles tightening under his thick coat as if something invisible had grabbed his attention. His gaze locked onto the far left bench. Specifically, onto a little girl sitting there. A tiny girl. 3 years old at most, wearing a pale blue dress with little embroidered stars across the hem. Her blonde hair was pulled back into pigtails so small they curled at the tips. Her name, whispered among the attorneys, was Leila Porter. She sat beside a victim advocate, her feet dangling inches above the courtroom floor. One hand clutched a worn-out stuffed rabbit whose fur was matted from years of love. The other hand nervously twisted the edge of her dress. Ranger didn't blink. Didn't move. Didn't even wag his tail. Deputy Keller frowned and tugged the leash gently. "Ranger," he whispered, "come." But Ranger didn't obey. Instead, he lowered his head, slowly, deliberately, never breaking eye contact with the little girl. His posture wasn't aggressive. It was something else entirely, something no one could immediately interpret. The people seated around Leila shifted uncomfortably. The victim advocate, a middle-aged woman with gentle eyes, placed a protective arm around the child's shoulders. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered. "He's just a police dog." But Leila wasn't comforted. Her tiny fingers tightened around her stuffed rabbit until her knuckles turned white. Her wide, frightened eyes lifted to meet Ranger. And then she did something unexpected. She leaned forward. Just an inch, but enough that the room noticed. The air tightened. Deputy Keller tried again, more firmly this time. "Ranger, heel." Nothing. The dog's breathing deepened. His focus sharpened. Something inside him recognized something inside her, something no one else could see. Judge O'Connell lifted her glasses, her expression curious. "Is there an issue, Deputy?" Keller opened his mouth to respond, but Ranger suddenly took a step forward. Not toward the judge. Not toward his handler. Not toward the defendant seated nearby. But toward Leila. A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. The prosecutor exchanged a look with the lead detective. Even the defense attorney paused mid-note-taking. Keller tightened his grip on the leash. "Ranger, stop." But the dog's instincts overrode commands. He took another step, slow and measured, as though approaching something fragile. His tail was stiff, not wagging. His ears stayed forward in full alert. His eyes, usually calm and assessing, held something deeper, something unnervingly human. Recognition. Fear. Memory. Leela's small lips parted. Her breath trembled. The rabbit in her hand slipped slightly, dangling by its worn ear. Beside her, the victim advocate frowned, confused. "Do you know that dog?" Leela didn't answer. Instead, she slid off the bench, her tiny shoes tapping lightly on the marble floor as she landed. She wobbled for a moment, then steadied herself. All eyes were on her. Every movement felt amplified. Every breath a countdown. Deputy Keller stepped forward, tugging the leash. "Ranger, that's enough. Sit." But Ranger didn't sit. He inched forward, pulling against the leash, not aggressively but insistently, like he needed to reach her. The judge leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowing as she tried to understand what she was witnessing. Leela took a hesitant step. Then another. Her gaze never left Ranger. She was trembling, visibly, but propelled by something stronger than fear. Something that made adults far older than her suddenly lean forward in their seats, sensing that they were watching something profoundly important. "Sweetheart," the victim advocate whispered urgently, "you don't have to go near him." But Leela shook her head. A tiny, determined shake. Her voice, when it came, was barely audible, fragile, cracked, heavy with something no 3-year-old should ever carry. "He remembers," she whispered. The courtroom froze. Even the judge blinked, startled. Deputy Keller's heart thudded. Ranger's ears twitched at the sound of the child's voice. "What did she say?" someone whispered. "I think she said he remembers." "Remembers what?" Leela took another trembling step toward Ranger. The dog lowered himself slightly, as if making himself less intimidating, but his gaze never softened. He stared at her with an intensity that made even seasoned officers shift uneasily. The entire courtroom watched a strange, heartbreaking connection unfold, one built on something unspoken, something shared between them, something from a night only two beings in this room truly remembered. Finally, Leela stopped just a few feet away from Ranger. Her breaths came short and shaky. She clasped her rabbit to her chest like a shield. Ranger stood silently, still frozen except for a slight tremor in his chest, something his handler had never seen before. Deputy Keller stepped forward to pull the dog back, but before he could, Leela spoke again. "Soft. Haunted. Determined. He knows what happened," she said. Every person in that courtroom sucked in a breath. The judge sat forward sharply. "Mr. Keller," she said, voice steady but eyes wide, "has this dog interacted with this child before?" Keller swallowed hard. "Not that I know of, Your Honor." But Ranger's behavior said otherwise. The tension climbed like a rising tide. The prosecutor's gaze darted between the girl and the dog. The defense attorney stiffened, sensing a sudden shift in the room's emotional gravity. Even the defendant, Leela's mother's boyfriend, the man shackled beside his attorney, lifted his head for the first time. His jaw clenched, his eyes narrowed. And then, Leela took in a shaky breath. Slow, careful. She opened her mouth and whispered two words that shattered the silence. But before she could finish, the judge lifted a hand sharply. "Hold on," she said. "Everyone stay exactly where you are." The room stopped breathing, because Judge O'Connell saw it first. A single tear rolling down Leela's cheek. A tear that landed softly on the marble floor. Right as Ranger took one more step toward her, pulling his handler forward, refusing to break his connection with the child. And in that suspended moment, no one knew whether Ranger's next move would bring answers or unleash something far more explosive. The courtroom had become a tension-filled chamber of whispers, shifting eyes, and unsteady breaths. Every person leaned slightly forward in their seat, as if moving closer could help them understand the impossible. K9 Ranger, the massive German shepherd, now sat a foot away from 3-year-old Leela Porter. His body was still taut, ears forward, muscles coiled, and eyes fixed entirely on her. Even the handlers couldn't mask their unease. Deputy Keller tugged gently at the leash, speaking in the calm, measured tone he reserved for high-pressure situations. "Ranger, heel," he said, but the dog ignored him. This was no ordinary disobedience. It was a deliberate, urgent refusal. Ranger's gaze locked on Leela's, following her every micro-movement as if reading her thoughts. Leela's small hands trembled as she held her rabbit, fingers gripping its worn ears. Her blue eyes, wide with both fear and determination, met Ranger's unwavering stare. For a moment, the room seemed suspended in a frozen tableau, a snapshot of two unlikely companions connected by something invisible and profound. The judge, Hun, Miriam O'Connell, adjusted her glasses, her calm judicial demeanor replaced by curiosity tinged with concern. "Deputy Keller," she said carefully, "does this dog have a history of interacting with children at scenes like this?" Keller shook his head, voice low. "No, Your Honor. Ranger has been at domestic incidents before, but he doesn't usually respond like this unless there's trauma he recognizes. And I've never seen him act this way around a child who isn't familiar to him." The courtroom murmur grew louder, almost audibly buzzing with confusion and curiosity. Leela shifted her weight, small shoes scraping softly against the polished marble. "He remembers," she whispered again, clutching her rabbit closer, the fabric crumpling under her tiny fists. "Remembers what?" a reporter muttered under her breath, scribbling furiously. The judge raised a hand, silencing the room. "Quiet, please. Let the child speak if she can." Leela swallowed hard. Her lips quivered, but she didn't look away from Ranger. The dog's body mirrored her tension, still and expectant. Slowly, cautiously, she took a step forward. The prosecutor leaned forward, hands folded, sensing the gravity of the moment. Even the defense attorney froze mid-note, the man's pen hovering over his pad. The little girl's voice was so soft it barely carried beyond a whisper, yet the courtroom hung on every syllable. He saw it," Leela said, her eyes wide, glistening with unshed tears. Ranger's ears twitched at the words, his nose dipping slightly toward her, as if confirming what she had just said. Gasps rippled through the room. The judge blinked, stunned. "Excuse me," she asked gently. Leela repeated, louder this time, trembling but determined. "He saw everything." The words hung in the air, thick and heavy. The courtroom collectively leaned in. Parents clutched children closer. Reporters adjusted cameras. The defendant stiffened in his chair. Ranger growled low, a warning not of aggression but of recognition. The dog's growl reverberated like a tremor across the polished floor, and everyone instinctively moved back, unsure what it meant. Deputy Keller, normally composed under fire, could feel his pulse accelerate. He tugged gently, voice tight. "Ranger, calm." But the dog did not calm. He pressed forward slightly, careful not to frighten the child, yet his presence was impossibly commanding. It was almost as though he were saying, "Trust me. Listen carefully." Leela's gaze drifted briefly toward the defendant, her mother's boyfriend, sitting shackled, his expression shifting from curiosity to subtle panic. She lifted her rabbit slightly, as if drawing courage from it, and whispered again. "He hurt Mommy. I saw it." Silence fell like a stone. The judge's hand froze midair. The prosecutor leaned forward, eyes sharp. The defense attorney's face blanched. Ranger's growl grew lower, vibrating through the courtroom, a rumble of warning and acknowledgement. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said carefully, "the dog, he was at the scene, wasn't he?" Keller nodded slowly, tension visible in his jaw. "Yes, sir. Ranger was deployed to the residence that night. He was present when the assault occurred. The child," he hesitated, glancing at Leela, "was present too." The courtroom collectively froze. Leela's small, trembling body pressed closer to Ranger, who adjusted his position to shield her almost instinctively. There was a raw, emotional energy emanating from the pair, a protective bond forged in the unthinkable aftermath of trauma. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "This child witnessed what happened?" she asked softly, almost not wanting the answer. "Yes, Your Honor," Keller admitted. And Ranger, he recognized it immediately. This is unusual behavior, but it's consistent with his past responses to severe trauma involving children. He's alert, protective, and he stopped, voice tightening. He remembers too. The words caused a ripple across the room. "Remembers," the victim advocate whispered to herself, gripping Leela's small shoulders. "Yes," Keller confirmed. "Dogs, especially trained K9s, have memory linked to trauma and sense. But what's happening here, this is unique. Ranger is connecting with the child on a level most humans cannot comprehend." The judge's gaze softened, almost tenderly, toward Leela. "Sweetheart, can you tell us what you mean?" Leela's lips trembled. Her voice, though quiet, carried immense gravity. "I told him what happened," she whispered. He listened. He wants me to be brave." Ranger's stance shifted subtly, leaning closer to her. His eyes were gentle now, protective, but still intense, aware, almost sentient in their understanding. The child's tiny hand brushed against his fur instinctively, and the courtroom collectively exhaled. The defendant's face had gone pale. He leaned toward his attorney, whispering furiously, but no one could hear. The tension in the room thickened, almost unbearable. The air itself seemed to pulse with unspoken truths. Leela took a shaky breath. "I'm ready," she whispered almost to herself. Then louder she said, "I saw him, he hurt Mommy." A collective intake of breath swept across the courtroom. The defendant's smirk vanished. Ranger growled again, low and resonant, his entire body taut, muscles coiled like springs. He was ready to defend, to assert, to confirm the truth that the child couldn't yet articulate fully. The judge raised her hand. "Order in the court. Bailiffs, ensure the defendant remains seated. Child, you may continue," gently. Leela swallowed, blinking rapidly. "He told me if I told anyone I'd be next," she whispered, barely audible. Ranger's growl deepened, almost a growl of warning aimed at the man sitting across the room. The tension was electric. The victim advocate, steadying her voice, whispered, "Leila, you are safe. Ranger is here. No one will touch you." Leela's small hands tightened on her rabbit, her eyes locked with Ranger. In that moment, an unspoken conversation passed between them, an understanding born from shared trauma and instinct. The dog's presence was a shield, a lifeline. The courtroom leaned in collectively, unable to look away. Even the most seasoned attorneys were captivated by the scene unfolding before them. A tiny child, trembling, yet unbreakable in her courage, connected to a massive, disciplined police dog in a moment of profound recognition. And then Leela whispered the words that would make everyone in the room pause and shiver. "He knows everything." The judge, eyes wide, adjusted her glasses again but said nothing. Every reporter, officer, and observer seemed frozen in place. Deputy Keller exhaled, tension coiling like a spring in his chest. Ranger's body remained taut, growling softly but protectively, refusing to take his eyes off the child. The courtroom was suspended in time, one moment too long, yet pregnant with revelation. No one knew what would happen next. Would Leela speak further? Would Ranger take action? Would the defendant realize too late that he could no longer hide behind his facade? And as the sunlight shifted across the courtroom, falling directly on Leela and Ranger, it illuminated a truth. A bond had formed, one that transcended words, age, and species. And that bond was about to change everything. The courtroom remained silent, the kind of silence that presses on the chest and makes every heartbeat sound like a drum. Ranger, the veteran German shepherd, sat perfectly still, eyes locked on 3-year-old Leela Porter. His growls had softened, but his body remained taut, ready, almost vibrating with anticipation. He didn't need commands. He seemed to know instinctively that the truth was about to emerge, and that it was fragile, dangerous, and vital. Leela's tiny hands clutched her rabbit, knuckles whitening. Her blue eyes darted briefly toward her mother's ex-boyfriend, the man seated at the defendant's table. His face, once smug, had gone rigid. Panic flickered in his dark eyes as he realized the courtroom's attention had shifted to something, or someone, he could not control. The victim advocate, a calm presence amidst the tension, leaned closer to Leela. "You can tell the truth, sweetheart. Ranger is here. He's on your side," she whispered. Leela nodded subtly, but her body shook with fear. The memory of that night, the screams, the violence, the helplessness, was still raw in her mind, too vast for words. Yet something in Ranger's unwavering gaze gave her courage. "Leela, do you want to tell everyone what you saw?" the judge asked softly, leaning down slightly, her voice measured, gentle, encouraging. The girl swallowed hard. Her voice, when it came, was barely more than a breath, fragile but piercing in its sincerity. I saw him hurt Mommy." The words cut through the air like glass. Gasps rose throughout the courtroom, punctuated by the faint shuffle of papers and the scratch of pens. Even the reporters, trained to detach themselves from emotion, found their hearts skipping a beat. Ranger's ears twitched. His growl deepened, not threatening but protective, almost as if affirming Leela's words. Deputy Keller's hands were steady on the leash, but he couldn't mask the tension in his shoulders. This dog was sensing things no one else could, memories, fear, trauma, and responding instinctively. The defendant shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His attorney opened his mouth to object, but the judge's sharp glare froze him. Silence, almost unbearable, returned. Leela continued, taking a careful step forward. He told me not to tell anyone." Her voice wavered. "He said if I do, I'll be next." Ranger stiffened, body coiled, a low warning growl rumbling through his chest. The prosecutor leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Sweetheart, who told you that?" he asked gently. Leela glanced at Ranger as if seeking permission. The dog's eyes, intelligent and steady, seemed to nod subtly. She pressed on. He said it at the house, that night." The courtroom collectively drew a breath. The victim advocate tightened her grip on Leela's shoulders, but gently, so as not to frighten her further. Deputy Keller could feel Ranger's tension radiating like heat. Something dangerous was lurking beneath the surface, something only the child and the dog truly understood. The judge adjusted her glasses. "Leela, can you tell us anything else about that night?" She looked down, voice trembling, then back up at Ranger. I told him to be brave." Her tiny words were a mixture of fear and defiance, and even the hardened officers felt a pang of awe. Ranger's tail swished slightly in encouragement. "Your Honor," Keller interjected, voice low, "Ranger's behavior is extraordinary. Dogs at this level don't usually respond to children this way unless they've been directly involved in the traumatic incident themselves. I believe Ranger may have witnessed parts of the event and recognized the threat to this child." The judge nodded slowly, her eyes on Leela. "I see. Child, do you want to tell us what exactly happened? You can take your time." Leela inhaled, small chest rising and falling rapidly. Her voice, soft but resolute, began to unfold the memory that had haunted her since that night. He came into the kitchen. Mommy was on the floor. She couldn't move." A shiver passed through the courtroom. The defense attorney opened his mouth to object, but the judge raised her hand. "Let the child speak." Leela clutched Ranger's fur as if drawing courage from him. "I tried to hide. I told him to help me." Her tiny fingers traced the dog's fur as her words spilled forth. "He listened. He stayed. He waited, and he remembered." The words caused a ripple of whispers to sweep across the courtroom. Gasps. The sound of pens hitting paper. Cameras snapping photos. Even the judge's eyes widened slightly. The idea that a trained dog had remembered the events of that night and responded to a child's unspoken plea was almost too surreal to believe. Ranger nudged her hand gently with his snout, encouraging her to continue. The courtroom leaned in collectively, drawn to the connection unfolding between human and animal. It was profound, almost sacred. I wanted to tell, Leela whispered, but he said I'd be next if I do. Her voice faltered, tears welling in her eyes. She pressed her forehead briefly against Ranger's massive shoulder. I wasn't brave, but Ranger, he wanted me to be brave. He told me in his way. He remembered everything. He knows what happened. Ranger's growl deepened, a low, resonant vibration that seemed to echo her words. Every officer in the courtroom instinctively felt the dog's protective instincts. He wasn't just alert, he was ready to act if necessary. The defendant's face had gone pale. His hand trembled on the table as he glanced at the defense attorney, panic now fully visible. He muttered something under his breath, but the words were lost to the courtroom's collective attention. The prosecutor leaned forward, voice calm but intense. Layla, can you tell us if anyone else was there? Did Ranger see everything with you? The little girl nodded slowly. Yes, he was there. He saw it all. Mommy, she didn't get to tell anyone. Her voice broke, trembling. But I can. Ranger, he's my witness. Ranger's body shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly, but enough to signal the courtroom. He confirmed her words. The connection between them was undeniable. The dog had sensed the threat, protected her, and remembered it all, an instinctive memory that would serve as silent testimony. The judge exhaled slowly. Deputy Keller, can Ranger verify what the child has said in some way? Keller hesitated. He had never been asked to do something quite like this in open court. Yes, Your Honor, he said carefully. Ranger can alert to the presence of the defendant and can indicate recognition of trauma-related sense, but it's unusual, very unusual. The courtroom buzzed with tension. Every person leaned forward, eyes glued to the girl and the dog. The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. Leela took another step closer to Ranger. She whispered, more to herself than anyone else, "It's time." Ranger shifted, ears forward, muscles tense, yet obedient to the child's will. He wasn't acting on command. He was acting on instinct, memory, and loyalty. And then she said it, two words that sent a chill down every spine in the room. He remembers. The statement landed like a hammer. Every adult in the courtroom froze. Every camera shutter clicked in rapid succession. The defendant's hand shook, and his jaw tightened. The reality that his actions had been witnessed, remembered, by both a child and a highly trained police dog was settling on him like an iron weight. Judge O'Connell leaned forward, gaze intense. "Child, what do you mean when you say he remembers?" Leela pressed herself against Ranger's side, trembling but resolute. "Ranger, he knows. He saw everything. He remembers the night. He wants me to tell." The courtroom seemed to inhale collectively. Officers shifted uneasily. Reporters scribbled frantically. The defendant's attorney looked like he'd swallowed ice, his eyes darting between client, child, and dog. The atmosphere was electric, charged with suspense. Something monumental was about to unfold. The truth, long buried, hidden behind threats and fear, was rising to the surface, carried on the voice of a 3-year-old and confirmed by the silent, unwavering witness at her side. And in that moment, every person in the room knew. The next words would either break the case wide open or ignite chaos that no one could contain. The courtroom's atmosphere was electric, a brittle tension that seemed to hum through the air. Every eye remained glued to the trio at the center. Leela Porter, fragile yet impossibly brave. Ranger, the massive German shepherd whose body radiated vigilance. And the defendant, who now sat frozen in fear, shackled but suddenly much smaller in the magnitude of the truth unfolding. Judge O'Connell cleared her throat, attempting to restore control. "Miss Porter, take your time. Speak slowly. Tell us everything you can remember." Leela nodded, her fingers tightening around her rabbit. She took a breath, a long, shaky inhale that filled her small chest, and began in a voice that was soft, yet crystal clear in its gravity. "That night," she whispered, "Mommy was scared. Really scared. He didn't let her move. I hid behind the couch, but I could see everything." The room went silent. Not a whisper, not a cough. Even the sound of a pen scratching across paper seemed too loud. The prosecutor leaned forward, pen poised over notes, but for the first time it seemed like even words might fail him. Ranger stiffened, ears forward, tail low but tense. Every muscle in his massive frame was alert. He shifted slightly, nudging Leela's hand with his nose, a protective gesture. The dog was not just aware. He was participating, witnessing, confirming what the child had seen. I wanted to tell someone," Leela continued, her tiny voice cracking. "But he said if I do, I'd be next." She shivered violently and pressed her forehead against Ranger's shoulder. The defendant, usually so composed in court, shifted in his chair, a subtle but telling movement. His attorney leaned forward, mouth opening, but the judge's sharp gaze silenced him immediately. "Child, you are safe here," Judge O'Connell said gently. "Ranger is here with you and no one will harm you. Please continue." Layla lifted her chin slightly. "Ranger, he stayed with me. He didn't move. He remembered. He saw Mommy and he remembered everything. He wanted me to tell the truth." Deputy Keller exhaled slowly, his hand tight on Ranger's leash. He had trained the dog for years, but he had never witnessed behavior like this. Ranger's reactions weren't just instinct. They were proof of recognition, memory, and loyalty, qualities most dogs rarely display in such precision. The prosecutor leaned forward, voice steady but firm. "Leela, can you tell us what exactly happened?" She nodded, eyes wide, lips trembling. He came into the kitchen. Mommy was on the floor. He didn't let her get up. I watched. I saw him hit her." A collective shiver ran through the courtroom. Even seasoned officers felt a pang of disbelief. The defense attorney tried to object, but the judge silenced him. "Let the child speak. She is telling the truth as she remembers it." Leela pressed closer to Ranger. I whispered to him, told him to stay, told him to be brave. Ranger, he knew. He wanted me to be brave too." Ranger growled softly, low in his chest, a sound that wasn't aggression but acknowledgement. He pressed closer to her, body coiled and protective, watching the defendant like a predator aware of a threat. The defendant shifted again, his expression darkening, eyes darting nervously. Something in Ranger's stance, the dog's unwavering attention to the child, and the child's innocent yet terrifyingly precise testimony was cracking his composure. Leela swallowed, her tiny shoulders trembling. I want to tell everything now," she whispered. Ranger nudged her hand gently, as if encouraging her to continue to find her courage. Judge O'Connell leaned forward slightly. "Go on, Miss Porter. Tell us what you saw." Layla looked at Ranger, took a deep breath and whispered, He hit Mommy until she couldn't breathe." The words landed like a hammer. A shiver of horror passed through the room. Ranger's growl deepened, resonating through the courtroom like a low thunderclap. Officers instinctively adjusted their positions, hands brushing their holsters, but Ranger didn't lunge. He simply stood, a silent sentinel, a living reminder of the crime that had occurred. The prosecutor's eyes narrowed. "Child, did anyone else see what happened?" Leela shook her head. "No, just Ranger. He was there. He saw it too." Deputy Keller exhaled through his nose. Ranger's behavior confirmed everything. Dogs have keen senses, memory, scent, reactions. But a child describing a crime to a dog, and the dog recognizing it so clearly, was unprecedented in courtroom testimony. The defendant's hands trembled on the table. His face went pale, veins popping at his neck. He whispered something to his attorney, but the words were lost in the rising tension. Leela pressed her forehead again against Ranger's side, trembling but determined. He told me not to tell anyone. He said if I did, I'd be next. Ranger, he wanted me to be brave. He told me it was okay now. The judge leaned back, eyes narrowing. Deputy Keller, can Ranger indicate recognition in some way that the court can observe? Keller hesitated. He had never been asked this in court before. Yes, Your Honor. Ranger can respond to sense movements and can alert to the presence of the individual responsible. But this is unusual, very unusual. The courtroom buzzed, reporters scribbling frantically. Every person leaned forward, anticipating the next move. Ranger shifted slightly, muscles rippling under his coat, tail stiff. He lowered his nose toward the defendant. The growl deepened, and his eyes were locked onto the man with unrelenting focus. The child swallowed, trembling. He remembers everything, she whispered. Ranger remembers. I saw him that night, and Ranger saw him too. He's never going to get away with it. The defendant paled, his eyes darting between the girl and the dog. Fear replaced arrogance in his face. Even the defense attorney, trained in controlling courtroom chaos, looked uneasy. The judge adjusted her glasses. Child, do you have anything else to tell us? Leela nodded slightly. I told Ranger something else, something I hid. He knew I was brave enough now to tell. A hush fell over the courtroom. Deputy Keller's grip tightened on the leash. Ranger's ears pricked forward. The tension was so thick it could be cut with a knife. Everyone in the room realized. The child was about to reveal something that could change everything. The judge exhaled, voice steady but firm. Go on, Miss Porter, tell us. Leela pressed her hands to her chest, gripping her rabbit tightly. Her voice was tiny, but each word rang like a bell in the quiet courtroom. I hid something that night. Ranger, he knows. I put it somewhere safe. Now I can tell. Ranger nudged her gently with his nose, almost imperceptibly. It was the kind of movement only a child would notice, yet it carried profound meaning. It's safe. You can speak. We can do this together. The prosecutor leaned forward. Child, what did you hide? Leela hesitated, tears streaming, but determination hardened her expression. A recorder. I hid it. It caught everything. Ranger, he knows it's there. The courtroom erupted into whispers. Phones snapped photos, reporters scribbled frantically, and even the judge leaned forward, stunned. The very notion that a 3-year-old had captured evidence, and that a K9 dog recognized it, was almost incomprehensible. Deputy Keller's eyes widened. Ranger's growl was low, vibrating through the courtroom as he fixed his gaze on the defendant. The dog's body language said one thing. This man was not safe, and the truth would be revealed. The defendant's face drained of color. His hands trembled on the table. His eyes darted to his attorney, but there was no comfort there. Just the dawning realization that his crime, witnessed by a child and corroborated by a dog, was about to be exposed. Leela pressed herself closer to Ranger. It's time, she whispered. The judge's pen hovered over her notes, the courtroom hanging on every word. Cameras clicked, microphones adjusted, and every eye remained fixed on the tiny girl and the massive dog at her side. And in that moment, everyone knew. The next revelation would be explosive. The hidden recorder, the corroboration by Ranger, and Leela's brave testimony were about to unravel the defendant's facade completely. The air was thick with suspense, fear, and anticipation. Every heartbeat seemed amplified. Every whisper of movement seemed monumental. The courtroom leaned in collectively, waiting for what Leela and Ranger would reveal next, knowing that nothing would ever be the same after the truth came out. The courtroom had become a stage for tension and disbelief, each person caught between shock, fear, and anticipation. Leela Porter, barely 3 years old, stood clutching her worn rabbit, her tiny shoulders trembling but her blue eyes filled with a courage that seemed beyond her years. Ranger, the German Shepherd veteran, remained by her side, massive body coiled with alertness, his gaze locked unwaveringly on the defendant. Every muscle in the dog's frame was tense, a living, breathing guardian, silently conveying, the truth will be revealed. Deputy Keller's hand was tight on the leash, but even he was aware that Ranger's instincts now far exceeded any training. The dog had sensed the threat, recognized the trauma, and understood the danger surrounding the little girl. This wasn't just protection, it was acknowledgement, recognition, memory. Judge O'Connell, pen poised but eyes wide, leaned forward slightly. "Miss Porter, you said there is something you hid, something that could help us understand what happened that night. Can you tell us?" Leela inhaled sharply, clutching her rabbit to her chest. She glanced at Ranger, her silent partner and protector, and whispered, I can." Ranger's head tilted slightly, a subtle nudge almost imperceptible to anyone else, but to the child it was a signal. "It's safe. You are brave now." The prosecutor's gaze sharpened. "Child, can you show us what you hid?" Leela nodded slowly, taking a careful step forward, feet barely making a sound on the polished courtroom floor. Ranger adjusted his stance, shielding her with his massive body. The child's tiny voice, trembling yet resolute, broke the silence. "I put it under the couch at home. It caught everything." The courtroom collectively inhaled. A recorder, evidence captured by a 3-year-old. It was almost impossible, yet there it was, a silent witness waiting to confirm every terrifying word she had just spoken. The victim advocate's hand gently steadied Leela. "Sweetheart, can you remember where exactly?" Leela nodded. "Behind Mommy's favorite chair. Ranger, he knows." She pressed her small hand to the dog's flank, whispering to him, and the dog responded with a subtle nudge of his snout. It was an unspoken language that no one else could fully comprehend. The defense attorney's face had gone pale. He leaned forward, whispering urgently to his client, but the defendant's eyes were fixed on the girl and the dog, a growing sense of dread spreading across his features. Every inch of composure he had maintained was eroding. Judge O'Connell's voice was measured but firm. "Deputy Keller, would you and Ranger accompany the child to retrieve the evidence?" Keller nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, Your Honor, Ranger will guide her." The courtroom held its collective breath as Leela, flanked by Ranger and Keller, took small, determined steps toward the exit. Each step amplified the tension. The child, 3 years old, accompanied by a massive German shepherd, carrying the weight of a crime's exposure, was a sight no one would forget. Outside the courtroom, the hallway stretched long and silent. The polished floors reflected the fluorescent lights overhead. Leela's small hand held tightly to Ranger's fur as he led her with unwavering precision, navigating the corridors, stairs, and narrow doorway to her home's recreation of the living room that had been recreated for evidentiary purposes under controlled conditions. Every officer and detective involved followed closely, ensuring the child's safety. Even Deputy Keller's normally calm demeanor was marked by tension. Ranger's tail stiffened with each step, muscles coiling as though preparing for an unseen threat. He had sensed danger before, and today it was real. Finally, they arrived at the recreated living room. The couch, worn, familiar, and scarred from years of family use, stood at the center. Leela's eyes widened, remembering every detail. She took a deep breath, glancing at Ranger. The dog responded with a reassuring nudge, urging her forward. I put it here," she whispered, kneeling carefully on the carpet. Ranger sat close, ears forward, nose twitching as if verifying the location. Deputy Keller's hand hovered over the child's back. "Go ahead, Leela," he said gently. With careful fingers, Leela reached under the couch. Her hand brushed against the recorder, a small device, scratched and worn, yet intact. She pulled it out slowly, holding it up for all to see. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "It's here. It has everything." The room was silent. Officers leaned in, taking in the gravity of what was happening. Ranger nudged the recorder with his nose, then pressed his massive head against Leela's shoulder. It was as if he was saying, "We did it. The truth is here." The prosecutor gently took the device, eyes wide. "We need to play it immediately," he said. Back in the courtroom, Anticipation had reached a fever pitch. Reporters whispered urgently, cameras flashed, and every eye was fixed on the child and her dog, the smallest witnesses holding the power to unravel a crime. Leela's hands shook as she held the recorder. Ranger pressed close, protective and alert. Deputy Keller motioned for the courtroom to settle as the prosecutor prepared to play the device. Static crackled through the small speaker. Then a woman's scream echoed, sharp, terrified, unmistakable. The room went still, every ear strained, every eye widened. And then the defendant's voice came, low and threatening. "If she tells, she'll be next." The courtroom froze. The words, recorded in real time by a child's bravery, confirmed every allegation. Even the most skeptical observer could no longer deny the evidence. Ranger growled, low and resonant, his body coiled as if ready to defend the child against the danger that still seemed present in the room. The defendant's eyes darted nervously between the child, the dog, and the judge, panic now fully visible. Judge O'Connell leaned forward. "Child, did you understand what was on this device?" Leela nodded, her small shoulders trembling. "Yes, I heard everything. He said it. I wanted to be brave. Ranger, he wanted me to tell." A tense silence fell over the courtroom. Every breath felt amplified. The connection between Leela and Ranger had become undeniable, almost sacred. Two witnesses, one human, one canine, holding the power to expose a crime that had remained hidden for too long. The prosecutor glanced at the judge. "Your Honor, we have everything we need. The device confirms her testimony and Ranger's behavior corroborates it. We are ready to proceed." The defense attorney stood abruptly. "Objection. This child cannot be considered a credible witness." Judge O'Connell cut him off sharply. "Objection overruled. This child's testimony combined with the evidence and the dog's behavior is admissible." Her gaze settled on Leela. "You've been incredibly brave." Leela pressed her face briefly against Ranger's side. The dog shifted slightly, a subtle nudge in reassurance. She had done it. She had faced her fear, and together they had brought the truth into the light. But the moment of relief was fleeting. The defendant's eyes were wild now, desperation written across every feature. His hands gripped the edge of the table. He whispered something under his breath, barely audible, yet the room felt the weight of it. "He's not done. I won't go down alone." Ranger stiffened instantly, growl low and warning, ears pricked forward. Even the officers instinctively felt the tension. The danger, though diminished, had not passed. Leela's small voice cut through the fear. "It's over. He can't hurt us now. Ranger, he remembered, he's my witness." But the defendant's next move, whatever it might be, hung over the courtroom like a storm cloud. And in that instant, everyone realized that the courtroom, the child, and the dog were on the edge of something far larger than testimony. The static from the recorder lingered faintly in the air, and the room seemed to hold its collective breath, waiting for the storm to break. The courtroom was a powder keg of tension. The recorder sat on the evidence table, its small body deceptively unassuming, yet what it held, the terror, the threats, the violence, was electrifying the room. Leela Porter, her small fingers still clutching her worn rabbit, sat beside Ranger, whose massive form seemed almost protective enough to shield the entire courtroom. Every muscle in the dog's body was coiled, ears forward, eyes tracking the defendant with unwavering intensity. Deputy Keller adjusted his grip on Ranger's leash. Even he felt the dog's heightened state, a signal that danger still lurked, despite the evidence in hand. Ranger wasn't just responding to the room. He was sensing the defendant's panic, the lingering threat, and the volatile energy of a man cornered. Judge O'Connell cleared her throat, her calm judicial demeanor a fragile veneer over the storm building before her. "Prosecutor, play the device. Everyone, remain seated." The recorder crackled to life, static first, then a woman's fearful voice, Leela's mother. Her trembling words cut through the air, chilling every listener. "Please don't hurt us." A moment later, the defendant's voice joined hers, low and threatening, unmistakable in its malice. "If anyone says a word, she'll be next. You understand?" The courtroom collectively shivered. Every adult leaned in. Even the defense attorney froze, a pen in hand, unable to process the audio. Ranger growled low, chest vibrating, eyes locked on the man who had inflicted so much pain. Leela's small hand trembled as she pressed it against Ranger's side. He's the one," she whispered, voice trembling but certain. "Ranger, he knows." Deputy Keller nodded subtly. "Yes, Miss Porter, Ranger knows, he saw it all." The prosecutor's voice rose slightly, calm but commanding. "Your Honor, we can now corroborate the child's testimony with both the recorder and Ranger's behavioral responses. This is more than sufficient to confirm the events of that night." The defendant shifted in his chair, jaw tight, hands trembling. His eyes flicked between the recorder, the child, and the dog. Panic replaced arrogance. He whispered urgently to his attorney, words lost in the courtroom din. Leela inhaled slowly, gathering courage. I'm not afraid anymore. Ranger, he remembered. He wants me to tell the truth." The judge leaned forward, voice steady but intent. "Miss Porter, you are very brave. Please, tell us everything you can remember so we may proceed." Leela's tiny voice cracked, but she pressed on. He came into the kitchen. Mommy was on the floor. I tried to hide behind the couch. He said if I told anyone I'd be next, but Ranger stayed. He remembered. He wanted me to be brave." Ranger's body shifted slightly, coiled but protective, growl low, resonant. The dog's instincts weren't just reaction. They were confirmation, a living validation of the events that had unfolded. The defendant's hands trembled, sweat glistening on his brow. He tried to speak, but Ranger's growl intensified, a warning that cut through the room like steel. Even the bailiff stiffened instinctively, sensing the danger that the dog had long since detected. The prosecutor leaned forward. "Child, did anyone else see what happened?" Leela shook her head. "No, just Ranger. He saw it all. He's my witness." The courtroom felt the weight of her words. Two witnesses, one tiny, one massive, both unwavering. The air was thick with suspense, tension that seemed to stretch time itself. Then Leela's voice dropped, trembling but decisive. I hid something, a recorder. It had caught everything. Ranger, he knows where it is." A collective intake of breath swept across the room. The judge's eyes widened. Deputy Keller's hand tightened on the leash. Ranger growled low, the sound vibrating the polished courtroom floor. The defendant's face drained of color. He leaned forward, whispering something frantic to his attorney. Fear, raw and palpable, replaced the composure he had feigned for weeks. Leela pressed herself closer to Ranger. "It's under the couch. Ranger, he knows. I can show everyone." Keller motioned subtly to the prosecutor. "We should retrieve it immediately, Your Honor. The child is capable, but Ranger will guide her safely." The courtroom was silent as Leela, flanked by Ranger and Keller, stepped toward the exit, tiny shoes tapping softly on the marble. Every adult instinctively felt the gravity of the moment. A 3-year-old leading a trained K-9 through corridors to retrieve evidence of a violent crime. Outside, the hallways stretched endlessly. Leela's small hand brushed Ranger's fur for reassurance. The dog's ears twitched, scanning for any threat. No one dared breathe too loudly. Even seasoned officers felt their pulse quicken, aware that the defendant's desperation could erupt at any moment. They reached the replica living room, the couch standing like a monument to past trauma. Leela knelt, her fingers brushing the edge. Ranger shifted, low growl warning nearby officers. Something was still not right. I put it here," Leela whispered. Carefully, she slid her hand under the couch and pulled out the recorder. Static hissed faintly from the device, anticipation vibrating through the room. Ranger nudged it with his nose, eyes locked on the defendant. The prosecutor motioned for everyone to remain calm. "Play it now," he instructed. The audio filled the room. Her mother's terrified voice, followed by the defendant's chilling threats, made the courtroom collectively shiver. Ranger growled low, coiled like a spring, ears pricked forward, every nerve alert. The defendant's face went pale, sweat glistening. His hands shook. He whispered, almost inaudible, "No, this can't, Shika." Leela pressed herself against Ranger. "It's over. Ranger, he remembers. He wants me to tell. We're safe now." But the tension escalated. The defendant's jaw tightened. His eyes darted toward the door, a subtle shift, almost imperceptible. Ranger's growl deepened. Every officer instinctively took a step forward. Something in the man's posture spoke of desperation. The judge's voice cut through the charged silence. "Bailiffs, ensure the defendant remains seated. We are proceeding with the evidence." The defendant whispered something under his breath. It was barely audible, yet the courtroom felt the weight. "He's not done. I won't go down alone." Ranger stiffened instantly, growl low, warning. Leela's small voice trembled as she whispered, He wants to hurt us. Ranger, he remembers." Deputy Keller tightened his grip on the leash. Ranger's body was a living warning, protective and ready. The defendant's desperation had escalated into a dangerous unpredictability. The room was frozen in suspense. Cameras clicked, pens scratched frantically, and every eye remained glued to the tiny girl and the massive dog beside her. In that moment, everyone knew. The next second could change everything. The truth had been revealed, but danger lingered, and the courtroom's fragile equilibrium could shatter at any instant. The dog growled, low and resonant, a coiled spring of instinct and loyalty. The defendant's eyes widened in realization. He had underestimated the bond, the memory, the courage of those two witnesses. And then Leela whispered, barely audible yet carrying the weight of everything. The courtroom felt like it had shrunk. Every breath, every movement, every heartbeat seemed amplified. Leela Porter, a tiny 3-year-old, stood gripping her worn rabbit, eyes wide and unblinking. Ranger, her massive German Shepherd protector, sat rigid beside her, tail low, ears forward, body taut like a coiled spring. Every muscle signaled vigilance, awareness, and readiness. The defendant's eyes flickered between the child and the dog, fear replacing arrogance in an instant. Panic was etched into every line of his face. Deputy Keller's grip on Ranger's leash was tight, his knuckles white, but he knew the dog was in control. Ranger wasn't just alert, he was anticipating, predicting, protecting. He could sense the threat in the room, emanating from the man who had tried to intimidate and harm. Judge O'Connell leaned forward, voice steady, though her eyes betrayed concern. "Miss Porter, are you ready to continue?" Leela nodded, small hands clutching the rabbit to her chest. "Yes, Ranger is here," she whispered. Her tiny voice carried more courage than many adults could muster. The prosecutor glanced at the judge. "Your Honor, we should proceed immediately. The child's testimony, corroborated by the recorder and Ranger's behavior, leaves little room for doubt." The defendant's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. Sweat glistened on his forehead. His eyes darted frantically, as if searching for a means of escape. He muttered something under his breath, almost inaudible, yet the room seemed to lean in. Ranger growled low and deep, a vibration that reverberated through the courtroom floor. It was a warning, precise and instinctive. The dog's massive frame shifted slightly, subtly positioning itself between Leela and the man. Every officer instinctively tensed, hands hovering over holsters. Ranger's instincts were telling them the danger was immediate. Leela swallowed, taking a deep breath, then whispered to Ranger, "It's time." The dog's ears pricked and his gaze sharpened. He knew exactly what she meant. The prosecutor motioned for the recorder to be played again, focusing on the moment where the defendant's threats were explicit. Her mother's fearful voice, followed by his chilling words, echoed across the courtroom. The static crackle seemed to linger in the air, thickening the tension. The defendant's face turned ashen. His jaw tightened, lips trembling. He whispered urgently to his attorney, words lost in the courtroom's charged atmosphere. Panic had replaced strategy. Judge O'Connell's voice cut sharply through the tension. Bailiffs, ensure the defendant remains seated. Child, proceed with your testimony. Leela's small hands trembled as she gripped Ranger's fur. She took a deep breath, voice stronger this time. He said I'd be next, but Ranger, he remembered. He saw it all. He's my witness too. Ranger growled again, low and resonant, eyes locked on the defendant. The man's breathing quickened, and he leaned slightly forward. It was almost imperceptible, yet every officer and adult in the room felt the tension spike. Suddenly, the defendant rose slightly in his chair, a subtle but threatening movement. Ranger stiffened instantly, hackles raised, body coiled. The dog let out a sharp bark, a warning precise and commanding. Sit, Deputy Keller commanded, but Ranger had already positioned himself, blocking any potential threat. The courtroom gasped. Cameras clicked, reporters whispered, and every person leaned forward in anticipation. The defendant froze, realizing his intimidation tactics had failed. He was surrounded, exposed, cornered by a child, a dog, and a room full of witnesses. His face drained of color, panic fully etched across his features. Leela stepped forward slightly, small but determined. It's over. Ranger, he remembers. I'm not afraid anymore. The prosecutor motioned for the recording to play one final time, capturing the man's threats in vivid detail. The defendant's eyes widened as the words filled the room. His arrogance shattered, replaced by raw fear. Ranger growled low, a vibration in his chest signaling the imminent collapse of the defendant's control. Deputy Keller whispered to the judge, Your Honor, Ranger is signaling recognition. The defendant is the one from that night. There's no doubt. The judge nodded slowly. Understood. Child, do you want to tell the court what happened next? Leela's eyes were bright with tears but also determination. I told Ranger to stay. I hid. I listened. He wanted me to be brave, and now everyone knows. The defendant's hands shook on the table. He leaned forward again, whispering something that sent a chill across the room. Ranger stiffened, body coiled like a spring. Every officer tensed. The air was thick with anticipation. Leela pressed herself against Ranger's side, small but resolute. He can't hurt us anymore. Ranger, he remembered everything. The judge raised her gavel, preparing to call for order, but the room was already on edge. The defendant's panic was palpable. Ranger's growl deepened. The child's courage radiated through the room. Then, in a moment so charged it seemed suspended in time, the defendant lunged slightly forward, desperate. Ranger reacted instantly, barking and stepping between the child and the man, teeth bared but restrained. The room erupted into chaos. Bailiffs rushed forward, officers moved in, but Ranger remained perfectly composed, his focus unshakable. Leela pressed herself against him, trembling but safe, her tiny hand gripping his fur. The courtroom was a storm of adrenaline, fear, and anticipation. Every person leaned forward, eyes wide. Cameras flashed. The defendant's face was a mask of terror. Ranger's growl vibrated across the room, a warning that no one could ignore. Judge O'Connell's gavel struck. Order, everyone remain seated. Her voice rang out, sharp and commanding, cutting through the chaos. Leela whispered softly to Ranger, It's okay, we're almost done. The dog's ears twitched, alert but calm, understanding every nuance of her words. The prosecutor spoke clearly, firmly. Your Honor, the evidence is clear. The child's testimony, the recorded audio, and Ranger's behavior all corroborate the events of that night. The defendant's guilt is undeniable. The defendant slumped back, defeated, panic and fear etched into every line of his face. Ranger remained by Leela's side, his massive frame a shield, a guardian, and a witness to truth. The courtroom held its collective breath as the judge prepared to render her next directive. The tension was almost unbearable. Every eye was on the tiny girl, and the dog who had changed the course of justice in ways no one could have imagined. And then Leela whispered, barely audible but carrying a world of courage. "He can't hide anymore." The courtroom was silent, charged with anticipation, every person hanging on the fragile thread of truth that now held the balance of justice. Leela Porter, clutching her rabbit tightly, sat beside Ranger, her massive German Shepherd protector, whose body was still coiled, alert and unwavering. The recorder lay on the evidence table like a small beacon of courage, the tiny device that had captured the defendant's threats, his violence, and the terror of that night. Deputy Keller's hands were steady on Ranger's leash, though his eyes betrayed the gravity of the moment. Ranger wasn't just a dog. He was the living embodiment of loyalty, memory, and protection. Every officer, every observer felt it, the palpable intensity radiating from the pair. Judge O'Connell leaned forward, voice measured but firm. "The court has heard the testimony of the child, the corroborating evidence, and observed the behavior of Ranger, the K-9 officer. It is clear that the defendant's actions have been documented and witnessed." The defendant, face pale and trembling, looked from the child to the dog and then to the judge. Sweat streamed down his temple. His arrogance, once palpable, had been replaced entirely by fear. Every strategy, every attempt to intimidate had crumbled. Ranger shifted slightly, pressing closer to Leela, tail low but body tense. His gaze never wavered from the defendant. Every muscle communicated the same unspoken message. "The threat is here. The truth is here. You are cornered." Leela, small and trembling, raised her voice. He hurt Mommy. He said I'd be next if I told. But Ranger, he remembered. He saw everything." The courtroom collectively exhaled. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras flashed. But the attention remained fixed on the unlikely duo. A child and a dog whose courage had brought a predator to justice. The prosecutor leaned forward. "Your Honor, we request that the defendant be held in contempt of court for his threats and proceed to sentencing immediately." The child's testimony, reinforced by the recorded evidence and Ranger's behavior, is compelling beyond reasonable doubt. The defense attorney's mouth opened, but the judge's sharp glare silenced him immediately. His client's panic was unmistakable, and any attempt at manipulation had failed. Leela pressed herself closer to Ranger. "It's okay, he can't hurt us now," she whispered, tears in her eyes. Ranger nuzzled her gently, a reassuring weight against her shoulder, letting her know she was safe, that her courage had made a difference. The judge exhaled slowly. "The court finds the defendant guilty on all counts, based on the overwhelming evidence, including the child's testimony, the recorded threats, and the corroboration by the K-9 officer." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. A few sobs rose quietly from the gallery. Ranger's ears twitched. He relaxed slightly, sensing the shift in tension. The predator was no longer a threat. Justice, long delayed, was finally taking its rightful place. Deputy Keller leaned down to Leela. "You did it. You were brave. Ranger helped you, but it was your courage that got the truth out." Leela hugged Ranger's massive head, pressing her tiny face into his fur. "We did it together," she whispered. The defendant was handcuffed and led out by bailiffs. His eyes were wide with terror, no words escaping his lips. Ranger's low growl followed him as he passed, a final reminder that justice had teeth. The courtroom slowly exhaled. Reporters scrambled to capture the story, but even their trained detachment was overcome by the emotion of the moment. A 3-year-old and her police dog had faced danger, fear, and trauma, and prevailed. Judge O'Connell allowed a moment of silence, her eyes softening as they rested on the child and the dog. "Miss Porter, Ranger, you have both shown remarkable courage. Today, the court acknowledges that bravery can come in the smallest of packages, and that truth, no matter how hidden, will always find a way to be heard." Tears streamed down Leela's cheeks. She clutched Ranger's neck, burying her face into his fur. Ranger licked her hand gently, his body still protective but now relaxed slightly. The weight of fear had lifted. The bond between them had transcended the ordinary. It was now legendary. The victim advocate approached, kneeling beside the child. "You've done something incredible. Your mother will be safe now. Your bravery will be remembered forever." Leela whispered softly, barely audible, "Ranger, we did it." The dog nudged her gently, as if in agreement, eyes bright and intelligent. Deputy Keller patted Ranger on the head, then glanced at Leela. "You're safe now, little one. No one can touch you. Ranger has your back always." The courtroom began to empty slowly, a mix of relief, awe, and respect hanging in the air. Reporters captured the moment, officers exchanged looks of quiet admiration, and Judge O'Connell remained at her bench for a moment longer, reflecting on the extraordinary scene she had witnessed. As Leela and Ranger walked out side by side, the hallway seemed almost impossibly long. But there was no fear now. The little girl who had faced terror and the dog who had remembered it all moved together toward the light, a symbol of hope and resilience. Outside the courthouse, sunlight spilled across the steps. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, but the focus was clear. The small girl and her loyal companion had faced a nightmare and emerged victorious. Ranger remained alert, protective, but now his stance held pride, not fear. Leela's tiny hand rested on his massive head, a bond forged in courage, trauma, and unwavering trust. Deputy Keller knelt beside them, his voice gentle. "You've made history today. People will talk about your bravery for years to come." Leela smiled faintly, hugging Ranger tightly. "We did it together," she repeated. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the child laughed softly, a pure sound of relief and triumph. Ranger nudged her playfully, a tail wagging for the first time in the courtroom, signaling that the danger had passed and the bond between them was unbreakable. The courthouse doors closed behind them, and the world outside awaited. A world now safer because a tiny girl and a courageous dog had stood tall against darkness. Even in a city bustling with noise and chaos, the story of bravery, loyalty, and truth would echo for years. A 3-year-old whispered 2 words to a police dog in court, and justice had followed, unstoppable, fierce, and undeniable. The pair disappeared into the crowd, tiny and massive, human and canine, yet inseparable. And though the world had witnessed only a fragment of their bond, those who had been present knew this. Courage has no size, and heroes come in all forms. The end.